Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, which is Presenting with Impact, and this session, which is the second out of 3 sessions, is Building Your Powerful Presentation. And I'm very pleased to say that we're joined once again by Liz Marsden, who will be presenting today's webinar. Liz is an expert in the field of training and development, and I'm sure you probably tuned into the first session that she did, which was brilliant. If you did happen to miss that one, then it is on our YouTube channel, and I can also arrange to send you a link to that if you're not aware how to find that. This is the last one of our sessions this year. We'll be doing webinars again next year, and we'll send out a schedule when exactly we know when they're going to be. So without further ado, I will hand over to Liz.
Thank you very much, Liz, and welcome everybody. So as Liz said, this is the second of 3 sessions. The first session focused on how to present, the physical things that you can do to make sure you do a good presentation. And if anybody joins us, you may remember this slide, which was talking about the impact of your presentation on your audience and how much impact each of 3 areas have. So body language, the words that you say, and the voice, so the way that you say it, and how much that impacts what your audience remembers after the presentation. And we identified that the most impactful area was the body language, what you do and what the people see you doing, and then it was about the way that you say it. So that's why we focused on that in session 1. However, that last 7%, it doesn't mean that that's not important. You can't stand and speak utter gobbledygook in front of somebody, or give them wrong facts, or deliver a poor presentation with amazing body language and get away with it. I think we probably all know that. So today is about that 7%, the what. So last time was about the how. This is very much the what and the content of your presentation. So what we're going to look at over the next 45 minutes to an hour are 3 key areas, really. First of all, how to define your objective, get really clear on what you're trying to do. What things do you need to think about with your audience? And then how to actually develop that content. And I would always say, stop and think before you start diving into opening up PowerPoints to build your presentation. Start with that objective. So we're going to dig into that in a little bit of detail now. The last area that you can see there is practice, and I will talk a little bit about that, but that's kind of really over to you to go do that practice afterwards. Moving into objectives, first of all, then. Stop, as I say, before you open your laptop and open PowerPoint. Get a piece of paper or some post-it notes and start thinking about, why am I doing this presentation? What do I want to get out of it? And I've got 6 questions to help you think about that. These are kind of key reasons that people will be giving a presentation. Sometimes it's purely to educate. Often, particularly in the workplace, it's about gaining buy-in from people, getting people to take some action, activating them. Sometimes we want to inspire. Sometimes we want to get feedback from other people. And sometimes it's to get ourselves the correct exposure. And you may remember, if you did the last workshop, I talked about the importance of exposure in developing a career, and there were 3 key elements that impacted a career development. It was performance, image, and exposure. So sometimes you'll be giving a presentation and there'll be another reason for doing it, but in the back of your mind, it's good to think about, am I in front of people that I really want to impress here, and how can I make sure I do that in the best way? So those are key things to try and hone down. Why am I doing this presentation? If somebody said to you, you need to do this presentation, again, try and work out what's in it for you, but also what's their objective in you doing that. And one of the best ways I've found to really get to the nitty-gritty of that is to use something called a purpose statement, and write one for yourself. It's what I do whenever I'm starting to develop any training, is think about what do I want to be different afterwards. So the purpose statement is basically a three-parter. The purpose of my presentation is so that, in order to, and that really helps you get down to the crux of why you're doing what you're doing and what you want to be different. So let me give you an example, because it's easy to just look at that and go, yeah, what? The purpose of my presentation is to share the findings of your department's audit so that we can form an action plan in order to raise the compliance levels in the department. And this was work I did with an internal auditor who was doing a presentation on the audit that they conducted, and really digging down into why are you doing that? Well, ultimately, you want them to make sure that everything's compliant in the department. So that last part here is about what do we want to be different. And by doing this purpose statement, it really helps you to get clear in your head what you're doing and why. And what I'd advise you to do is to write that on a post-it note or a note somewhere and stick it somewhere as you work on your presentation, because this is your kind of your touchstone to keep going back to when you've got lots and lots of information and you're trying to hone things down. Does this fit this purpose statement? Because if it doesn't, get rid of it. Okay. So this is your first part. Really spend some time getting clear on that definition. Why am I doing this? What do I want to get out of it? And that will make the next stages a lot easier. The next part is to really think about your audience. So we're still not opening the laptop. We're still not diving into PowerPoint. Think about who are the people that are going to be sitting in the presentation, and what do you need to know about them to be able to as well as you can do. So we talk about audience segments when I'm delivering this training, and you can kind of split your audience into a number of different groups. Your novice is your new to the business person who doesn't know lots of detail. They need an introduction to the subject. A generalist is somebody who needs to understand the broader scale and what's the relevance of what you're talking about to them. Managerial level is about needing some in-depth information, but what's actionable? What do we need to do? How is it going to affect my team? If you have experts in your audience, they're the ones that are likely to want lots of detail and technical detail potentially. So when you're thinking about how much to include, you might need to include more if you have those expert people within your audience, or you might need to have more detail to hand to manage questions if you get those kind of questions about the detail. If you're delivering to exec level, then they're going to want high level. They've got the time to get the significance and the conclusions of what you're doing. They probably don't want lots of detail. Obviously, if you've got a mixture, then that can be a challenge. But by starting to think about who are in this audience, that helps you again to tailor. And again, we've got some questions for you to help you gather some of that information. Who is going to be in the audience? And the more you can find out, the better. What do they already know about what you're going to be presenting? Because what you don't want to do is go into lots of detail about stuff that people already know, because you've lost them then. What information is important to them? If you can try and include that as far as possible, that helps you to engage them, and also probably stops you getting lots and lots of questions. What questions are they going to ask you? And I would always advise, think of the worst possible questions you could get asked, and then try and come up with some answers to them, so that you don't have that horrible heart sink moment when you get the question. So try and think worst case scenario, how am I going to deal with those things? And the last one there, what do you want them to say, do, or think after your presentation? You might hear that phrase as a call to action. What are you going to ask them to do differently, or to go and communicate to other people? and keep that. That should be quite linked to that purpose statement. But really helpful ways of just thinking about who is my audience and what do I need to know about them and what do I need to tailor for them. And this is including in things like thinking about how much jargon should I be using, or do I need to explain in a lot more detail when I'm going into technical issues. And back to that expert, if you're delivering to a lot of experts, then it often is, you can use all the acronyms, the jargon, they'll be comfortable with that. But if you have that mixture, think about which bits do you need to explain most clearly. Okay, so the next bit we're going to look at is the big chunk of this session, really, developing your content. And again, I would say, close the laptop, don't get into PowerPoint yet. Start thinking about what am I doing and how am I going to organise all this information. And I've got a video to show you. Give me 1 second. This is a guy called John Medina.
Yeah, hi everyone. Today we're talking about the human brain, and in particular a book written by John Medina called Brain Rules. Now, John Medina is a developmental molecular biologist and research consultant, so he's qualified to talk about how the brain operates. And in particular with this book, he talks about 12 rules of the brain and then how they might apply to our everyday life. Principle number 4, don't be boring. Really the principle or rule here is that we don't pay attention to boring things. The brain can only focus on one thing at a time. We are biologically capable of processing intention-rich inputs simultaneously. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Studies show that a person who is interrupted takes 50% longer to accomplish a task. Another interesting point here is that the brain processes meaning before detail. The brain loves hierarchy. Start with the gist and then into the detail. As I'm trying to do in this presentation, I start with the gist of the principles and then I work into the detail as required. The author also keeps subjects that he teaches down to 10 minutes only. He finds that there's a real cliff that people fall off at the 10-minute mark. So finish up before the end of 10 minutes, otherwise you run the risk of losing your audience. 5, short-term memory and remembering. So information coming to your brain is immediately split into fragments that are sent to different regions of the cortex for storage. The more elaborately we encode a memory during its initial moments, the stronger it will be. This is all important. And further to this, introductions are everything. Why? So why is this all this important? Because the memory of an event is stored in the same places that were initially recruited to perceive the learning event. Just makes that initial encoding all important when we go to recall things in the short term. Industries know all about this. I mean, within the film industry, there's a mantra that if you don't have your audience captured within the first 3 minutes, you don't have them at all. Public speaking, not dissimilar, but it's even worse. It's 30 seconds. I'm not sure how long I've got to keep your attention, but humans are fairly finicky by the sounds of things, and you may have moved on to something else already by now, and I'm speaking to myself.
Lots of information within there, and I can recommend
Hi everyone.
Shush, John. I can recommend the books or even some of the clips from those books. But I guess the point is about thinking about, for your audience, how do their brains receive information, process it, and therefore remember it? And you might remember, if you did the last session, I talked about making sure that you use emphasis to help your audience understand. And when we were looking at vocal control, one of the key things I talked about was making sure you slowed down, because your audience needs to hear the information, process it, and figure out meaning from it before you move on to the next point. And this fits very much with the things that we're talking about in the video. We need to understand the overall, the gist of something before we get into the detail, because you're giving a context, you're giving a purpose for somebody to listen to you. So introduce with the overall topic, and then try and organize your information into hierarchy. We like things to be organized for us. If we're just throwing a jumble of information, it makes it really hard to actually process it, understand it, and then retain it. When I'm teaching people how to train, I talk about building a wardrobe for your learners where they can file information neatly so they know where to find it. And that's what you're doing when you put a hierarchy into your presentation. So you start with the top level and then go into the detail, and I'll give you some examples of that in a second. So what stops us, do you think, from being clear and concise? Think of some presentations that you've been to where it feels like somebody's trying to cram the entire amount of their knowledge on a subject into a 10-minute presentation. So they're talking and talking and talking. That makes them speed up because they're worried about time. It also means that there's so much in there that as an audience, it's difficult to pick out the relevant bits or to take on the meaning. And there's a few reasons that we do that. Often we have a tendency to over-explain things to make sure people do understand. Being unprepared will generally mean that you give a long, rambling, incoherent presentation because you'll keep remembering other parts and, oh, I'll just add that in there. So when I talk about practice and preparation, that's why, so that you know exactly what you're doing. Academic teaches us to focus on a word count and having a long essay that we produce and using fancy phrases. So if you start by writing out your presentation, you kind of want to include lots of detail and make things sound fancy. Actually keep it simple is the best thing that you can do. And also it often is a result of wanting to share everything that we know and wanting people to be able to understand absolutely everything. This is why it's important to have that purpose statement and keep going back to it. Do I need to include this to deliver that purpose statement? And often the answer is no. So it's about editing out. So I would suggest once you've got your purpose statement, starting to gather together all the information that you think you need to put in the presentation, and then you need to start organizing. So let me give you an example of how to do that. Remember we had the headline, the hierarchy graph that I showed you earlier. So if you think about your presentation as the start of it is the headline, the what's in it for you, or the what I want you to do. Then you will move into your supporting arguments and then into the details. So I'm here today to talk to you about, here are the reasons, and here's the detail below those reasons. So to help that kind of make some clear sense to you, I've got an example of paragraph here that I'm going to read to you. Dear Chivis, do you remember last Saturday when I was playing with my boyfriend and you came? Well, he said that when I turned around, you gave him a kiss. Sunday, when you came to my house and my mum prepared tuna fish salad, you said, yuck, that's the worst salad I ever had. And yesterday, when my cat got tangled in your legs and you kicked her and threatened to attack her with your dog, Brutus. Well, for those reasons, I hate you and I don't want to be your friend. Blah, blah, blah. Lots of information. So we want to think about, okay, what's the key bit? What's the headline out of that information? And we've got that organised in the next stage. So the headline out of all of that was, I don't want to be your friend. Yeah. Why don't you want to be my friend? Because you kissed my boyfriend, because you insulted my mum, because you kicked my cat. That's your supporting arguments. And then the evidence, you can see there, he told me, I heard you, I saw you. And then you finish off with the headline again. So you think about this in relevance to a business presentation. You start with your headline, and going back to your purpose statement, that's probably going to be your call to action, your I want you to do this differently. Then get into the whys and the detail, and then finish off with that call to action. Remember in that video, Dominina was talking about the first 30 seconds and then the recency effect of you remember the last thing you heard. So emphasize those parts. The other advantage to organising your presentation in that way is that if it gets cut short, you've still got your key point across right at the start. The temptation is to start with the detail and build up to what I want you to do. But actually, if you reverse it round, it means you get your message across quickly. It makes it a lot easier for your audience to understand, because they've got that overarching gist of where you're going with things already. So that's all about how you structure your presentation, and look at the data and take out the things that you don't need. A kind of quick and easy way to think about that is to just think of your presentation as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. So your beginning is that impact part where you grab the attention of the audience, you give your introduction. So then you go into the body, the key arguments that you've got, and your conclusion is where you wrap up and tell them again what it is you want to do. So you've got headline and high level outline in your introduction. You probably heard this described as tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. And not only does that keep things really nice and organized, but it also uses repetition. So again, you are helping your audience to remember those key points. And if you keep your key points nice and simple and not too many of them, you can repeat them, you can deliver them slowly, and you can make sure that hopefully your audience retain as much of that information. So the organizing of all that data will help you to give a good, clear, concise presentation. What else can help with that? So begin with the end in mind, is back to that purpose statement, get that first. Then start to organize that content into your headline, your supporting argument, and your supporting facts and data. The next part is probably one of the things people find really difficult: eliminate the unnecessary. If we've done loads of research or we're sharing something about something we're really proud of, it's quite hard to decide that something can just not be included. But it's really important to do that, because otherwise it's just overwhelmed. So get rid of unnecessary information, and then get really into the detail of cutting out the unnecessary words, phrases, cut the waffle. So you may be familiar with this quote from Einstein: you don't really understand something until you can explain it to your grandmother. You need to be able to explain something to someone who knows nothing about it, and that shows that you really know your information. It's thinking about, how do I simplify and make this really clear? And it takes a lot of work. It's much easier, as I said, to just throw lots of information at people. It's much more time consuming to gather the information, organize it, and edit it right down. There's another quote that I use often when training trainers again. If you want me to give a 2-hour presentation, I'm ready today. If you want a 5-minute speech, it'll take me 2 weeks. And that's because it's so much work, but it's worth doing. And that's why, again and again, I say, don't open the laptop and start just throwing everything at PowerPoint. Spend the time thinking about organizing first. So when I talk about getting rid of the waffle, these are just some examples that often, if you type out your presentation or you write it out, where we tend to add more words in, wouldn't normally necessarily be the way that we speak. Sometimes it might be, but this is where you can start really cutting and being more clear. Fairly obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people use 5 words instead of 1 at this point in time. So you get the idea. I won't labour that anymore. But you just cut as many of those words as you can. And we've got an example here of, when I started my own business, it gave me a whole new perspective to see the bigger picture when it comes to finding a work-life balance. Right, how do you start with editing that? Start by highlighting what are the important bits in there. Then look at where you can chop some words out. So when I don't need that necessarily, do we? you go from that to that much shorter sentence. Starting my own business has given me a new perspective on work-life balance. A lot easier to hear and understand and relate to. So spend time editing, cutting out, getting rid. And that's kind of the key parts of preparing to deliver your presentation. So you start with that purpose statement, get really clear on what you're doing and why. Then dig into the audience. Who are they? What are their needs? What do you need from them? And then really start organizing all your information. As I say, this takes a lot of time, so make sure that you give yourself enough time. Now, I mentioned that the fourth part of developing your powerful presentation was about practice. The key bit is putting that time in here, but then it is about practicing your presentation as much as you can. So just wanted to touch on some things to think about when you get to that stage. First of all, is expect the unexpected. Be prepared for disaster, basically. Think about what could go wrong and how would you deal with it if it did go wrong. And that's more relevant these days than ever with this kind of presentation, virtual presenting, using all sorts of technology. What do you do if your mic doesn't work? What do you do if your slides have disappeared or got deleted or something? Have some backup plans, send stuff to other people, but practice beforehand so that you know exactly how everything works. So yes, practice this kind of with the equipment and using the slides, etc. If you're delivering face to face, if you possibly can, I would say get into the room that you're going to be delivering in and have a practice run. Check out things like, where am I going to be standing? Is there space for me to move around? As we talked about last time, ideally you want to move within that space. If you are going to do that, literally practice walking around and see what's going to trip you over as you move. But also, where are my slides going to be? How well will my audience be able to see those and see me? What's the sound like? Do I need a microphone? Because if I do, then let's get one. How are people going to be seated? All of those kind of things. But then actually physically stand and practice delivering that presentation, because also at that point, that's when you might realize that you can chop a few more words or something needs a little more explanation. And if you can do that with a friendly colleague as an audience member to get some feedback, I talked about feedback a lot last time, then brilliant. But also they can just test out, can they hear you okay? Does it make sense to them? Do you need to explain things differently? So practice as much as you can, anticipate as much as you can. Also, I've talked about not opening your PowerPoint until later on, but you probably are going to have PowerPoint slides or some sort of visuals. And if you use them a lot, you'll be aware of the notes facility that you can have in there. If you're in a situation where you don't have that and you're not going to have your notes sort of on a screen with you, there is nothing wrong with having some notes where you are presenting. Nobody's expecting a complete memory test. That's not what your presentation is generally. It's not a recital. I mentioned about when you have audience members who are experts, you might want to have extra data available, have that to hand as well. But there's nothing wrong with having key points of your presentation nearby. What I would say is don't have your entire presentation written out on sheets of paper, because you will lose your place. You won't know where you're at with it. So break it down into key points, and those cards that you see there are really handy for doing that. What that does also is, as part of your developing and writing your presentation, it helps you to get really clear on those segments. So where is my headline, where's the supporting arguments, what's the facts underneath, and you then organise that information well. And the more you do that, the more you'll remember it also. So you're less likely to need your notes, but it's fine to have them. Key things I would say if you are going to have notes, I'd say don't have sheets of A4 paper. A, because you'll lose your place and you'll just end up shuffling paper. B, if you are at all nervous and you're holding a piece of A4 paper, then you'll shake. And that's amplified 1,000,000 times with a piece of paper and a microphone, and your audience will be looking at going, yep, pretty nervous then. So small cards, make sure they're fairly stiff card. Ideally, punch a hole through and clip them together, because when you drop them, and you will drop them at some point, you want to be able to put them back in the same order straight away and on the same note, number them. So that preparing notes like that can be a big part of developing your presentation and also helping you to organise it, refine it, and then to practice and embed it for you, and then also to hone your delivery. So last time we talked about body language, so making sure you have eye contact with your audience, that you have points where you move within the room, that you use good vocal control, and you have some parts where you're louder or quieter. You insert some real big pauses in places. You can also put that on your notes. What I tend to do is just have a symbol, so an eye for eye contact, a hand for hand gestures, a microphone for louder, and just a big oval for a pause. And add those on the notes in a different colour pen just to remind me, if I'm looking at them, that that's what I need to do. So that you are still keeping all of that impactful work that we talked about last time with body language and vocal control, and you've got a note of it. And that's what preparation gives you, the time to think about all of those things. PowerPoint as a separate topic, the next session is going to look at, in quite a lot more detail, PowerPoint, how to construct good visual aids. So whether it's PowerPoint or anything else, are you using the visual aids to help your audience to absorb your message, or are you using them as a script for yourself? Because you want to be doing the first one, not the last one. So that's the next session. But just some tips if you are using PowerPoint with your presentation. Firstly, if you're doing it face-to-face, things to think about. Often you will see people with a big board behind them where you're projecting, and they will turn around and talk to the board and point at it. Try not to do that. Try to point and make sure you turn back to your audience, because what happens often is they'll lose your voice. They can't hear you very well. Also, you generally don't want them to be looking at the back of your head. And you also don't want them to just be reading slides all the time, but we'll talk about that in a lot more detail next time. So yeah, point, turn, present. Try and get a bit of practice with the things that PowerPoint can help you with. So there's ways you can blank a screen so that people aren't looking at it all the time. You can use pointers, make sure you've got the right technology. So if you check things out, like, is it a Mac based, is it Windows based? Take cables with you. Don't trust any venue to provide them, I would definitely say, with your PowerPoint stuff. So, and I mentioned also email a copy of your stuff to the host to make sure. So next time we're looking a lot more detail at things around PowerPoint. And questions I generally get around practice from people are, it's great, I will spend the time delivering the presentation and developing it all, and I can do all of that. What do I do about managing my nerves when I'm actually ready to start? So again, practice is probably the most valuable thing that you can do there, but some other things to think about, just to give you some of those tips. Breathing exercises. Breathe in, hold your breath. Do this before the presentation. Don't start doing this on stage. But a way to reduce that stress in your body is to literally breathe in, hold that breath, and tense all your muscles. You can't feel stressed whilst doing that. What you're doing there is stopping an adrenaline surge. So that's something to do in the toilet before your presentation, not on stage. The same with the power pose. But think about controlling your breath, practicing breathing exercises. If you're starting to feel panicky when you're on stage, at the podium, whatever, then literally just breathe in and breathe out. And you may remember, if you were on last time's session, when I talked about vocal control and making sure you are projecting enough volume, was not just about making sure that your audience can hear you. It's about sounding a bit more confident, and also it forces you to breathe in and get air in your lungs. Because naturally, if you're feeling nervous, you will breathe from here. You'll breathe quite shallowly. And what that does is quieten your voice, but also what that does is send a signal to your body that you're feeling panicky. So if you can take deeper breaths, that's you sending a signal to your body that it's okay, and that you can stop with the fight or flight syndrome, and you can relax a bit more. So breathing exercises beforehand, and remember to keep taking nice deep breaths when you're actually presenting. The power pose, some of you may have heard of Amy Cuddy. She's a professor in the States somewhere who researched what impact body language has on how we feel and how we communicate ourselves to other people. And what she discovered was basically fake it till you make it. So by taking stances that make you look confident, and I'm not advocating doing a Wonder Woman on stage, but by taking up space, so by moving within the space on stage or in the room, or by using gestures that are pronounced, you will be perceived as more confident, and you will start to feel more confident. But the other thing she found, and the reason for the Wonder Woman poses, is that actually, if you go and practice that pose, probably again in the toilet, but practice that combined with the deep breathing, it will help you to feel more confident. Again, absolutely not suggesting you do it on stage, but just things that you can do to help build your confidence and to reassure your brain and your body that you know what you're doing, you've got this, everything's going to be okay. So those are just some extra tips, but I guess the key points from today are around that, thinking about what it is that you are trying to do with your presentation. So go right back to that purpose statement. Why are you doing what you're doing? What do you want? The best question I find to use is, what do I want to be different as a result of this training or this presentation? If the answer is nothing, why are you doing it? So there will be something that you want to be different, even if it is about you gaining more credibility or you getting a message out there. So focus on, why am I doing that, and really spend the time honing that. Then move into, who are my audience? What are they made up of? How are those different people going to listen to me? What do they need from me? And maybe go out and ask some questions of people if you've got that opportunity. And that's the point, I would say, that you can start gathering in your information, doing your research, getting your data together, and think about, how do I want to organise this? And then we get into that detail and organising into the headline, the supporting arguments, and the details and the facts that back that up. And that's the bit that takes the time, and then you do the editing of the extra words, the extra info. And when we're talking about have a backup, have a plan B, I would suggest being able to identify in that information, which bits, if your time gets cut or you find yourself running out of time, which bits can you jettison, which bits could maybe you include as follow-up information to your audience. So be ready to drop some, because I think most of the things that I've done, normally we end up with less time to present because probably the people before have run ahead or just because of circumstances. So be prepared to squash your presentation down a little bit, but still get that key message across, which is another reason. Start with it, end with it, and have the facts there if you need them. And that pretty much brings us to the end of developing your powerful presentation. So does anybody have any questions at that point, or anything else that they would like to ask us about? I'm conscious I've given you the gift of time here.
I'm sorry, I should have said to everybody as well at the beginning that if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I will read them out to Liz as well. We do have a couple of questions already. Firstly, how can I make sure that I don't run over time that I've been allocated?
There's a few different answers to that one. First, it is making sure that you have prepped that data, as I say, being really clear on getting rid of lots of stuff. The practicing is a key part here. So often, until you actually deliver and start delivering that presentation in the way that you're going to do it, you're not quite sure exactly how long it's going to take you. So I'm a big advocate for deliver it in front of a mirror, record yourself delivering it, because that will make sure you're absolutely 100% sure on what time you've got. But also it gives you that feedback I was talking about of seeing how you're presenting. But yeah, record yourself or do it 2 or 3 times. Think about the questions that you might get that might derail you as well, because that's really easy to get sent off on a tangent. And I don't think last time we really got into detail with handling questions, did we? But my tip with that is, at the start, tell your audience how you want to take questions, whether you want to take them throughout or you want to wait till the end. Because then at least you've signposted that. And if somebody does ask a question part way through and you want them at the end, you can say, well, I'll park that. Because it is very easy to get sent off on a tangent with that if you're not careful. So anticipate that, try and include that information within your presentation. Practice a few times. And I mentioned just there, being ready to get rid of parts, know what you can drop if necessary, if you are running out of time or you're squeezed on time for whatever reason. Have that contingency, that plan B if needs be. What tends to happen is people suddenly realise, they look at the clock and realise that they're I'm going to have to get through loads in 2 minutes here. And they try and rush through it all. If you suddenly look at the clock and think, I'm not going to get to my last 3 points, take a breath. And evaluate where you can stop and then go to your conclusion. Because ideally what you've done is at the start, you've told them what it is you're there for, what your headline is, then you're getting into the detail. And then you're going to conclude. If you have to ditch some of the detail, that's not the end of the world. But be prepared to do that. And that really comes into the practicing and the developing your content. So time spent doing that and practicing through are the things that will help you when it comes to sticking to times.
I do a lot of presentations. I always practice. I know there are people that can just stand up and speak. I'm not one of those people. So I always like to practice, but I very much focus on the time that it's going to take as well. So I'm always got a stopwatch. I'm always timing myself on my presentation to make sure that I fit within that time limit. I used to do company law seminars as well. That would be a 3-hour session, and I was told very much at the beginning, you start on time, you finish on time, because people have paid to be there, so you don't want it to run short, but also people have places to be afterwards. So that was very much kind of ground into me right at the outset, and that's something that I've always tried to do. But yeah, I'm very much a person that practices just stand in a room on my own, just going through it with a stopwatch, and I find that really helpful as well.
And it helps just get it into your head as well, and the more comfortable you are with your content, the more likely you are to run really smoothly. But it was something that's been drilled into me from a very early time in training, is not to be that trainer that finishes an hour late, because having sat through so many of those, you lost people. It's also why I don't tend to give timings to people right at the start of the day, because I don't want them to start going, we should be going for lunch now. But I have always got that clock running in my head, and I do a timetable. Even for a session like today, you won't be able to see that very well, but I do minute by minute or slide by slide how long I think each will take. And if you're running presentation or any sort of session with somebody else, even more important that you've both sat down, been through and agreed that, because otherwise that other person is going to take all your time. Might just be me and the person that I work with, but it's definitely worth being on the same page with that. And it sounds a little bit over controlling for me to list how many minutes on each thing, but it gives me an idea. I can then go off piste and I can flex that backwards and forwards, but I know where I should be, and if I'm running over, it gives me the heads up to, right, you need to ditch this or compress that. So it's worth spending time. You're probably not going to do that for a presentation, but if you've got, like you're saying, 3-hour seminars and things, that's the level of detail you probably do want to go to.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Another question, how do I get across lots of information quickly?
I'd say this is partly going back to editing. How much information do you genuinely need to get across? And be a bit ruthless on that. But also, this will fit in quite nicely with next time's seminar. Think about how you can get it across simply. And often that's visuals. I know you have a lot of financial people probably here, and I used to be the HR business partner for the finance function in GE. So I sat through a lot of presentations that had millions of graphs and tables that were so tiny you could not read a single thing, and they read through every single line. And actually, there's better ways sometimes to display that data. I think you need to ask yourself which bits you're displaying or reading through because they're your comfort zone, and which bits the audience actually needs to know. Pull out those bits and then think about what's the best way to make that really clear to somebody. And sometimes it can just be a really simple graph, bar chart, but take out all the extra info. So say I'll give you some demos of that in a bit more detail next time, but try and take away as much as possible so that the audience can focus on the most important stuff. And again, that goes back to really preparing and going through your information. There's no getting away from it. You have to spend ages.
Right, there's no more questions. As always, if you think of anything afterwards, then drop me a line. I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. I want to thank Liz again for another brilliant presentation today. And I'm sure that I think there's quite a few people. Unfortunately, there's the budget announcement as well, although that got released early, so that was a bit of a nightmare for the government again. But it will be shared online, and I have got copies of the slides as well that I can share with everybody as well. But thank you so much, Liz, for your time.
Very welcome.
And we have the last one in the set of 3 to be delivered next year, and we'll let everybody know the dates of that towards the end of this year. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Liz, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Have a good day.
Bye.